This is the Capstone Community Bible Church podcast. Thanks for joining us. Hello, this is Jamie. Regarding this week's episode, unfortunately our system went down and we weren't able to get the live stream working, but we were able to get a recording with a phone, so we do have the majority of the service. We did lose a small portion at the beginning, and throughout the episode you will hear room tone, but other than that, we do have the episode available now. Thanks for your patience.
I want to make a statement, and then I want to spend the rest of the morning defending my statement, and then you can, at the end, decide whether or not you agree with my statement. It's this. There is such a thing as a good Christian leader and good Christian leadership, but there is no such thing as perfect Christian leadership. Right? So there is such a thing as good and godly Christian leadership, but there is not such a thing as perfect Christian leadership. And as such, how we choose our leaders matter. Who we decide is going to be in a position of influence, authority, or power, whatever it might be, how we do that matters. And the lens that we need to use in choosing our leader is a Christological lens. A Christological lens, and we're going to look at that this morning. Deuteronomy chapter 1 is a passage that looks at the judicial system for Israel. Now, what I don't want to do is make the mistake of the one-to-one. We talked about this last week, that one of the hermeneutical mistakes, meaning this, how we interpret it improperly, is when we say this must equal this. So if they did this in Deuteronomy chapter 1, it must mean this is how we do it in our church today. But this is a passage on building up judges. It's about the infrastructure politically for Israel. However, it does frame for us an understanding of how it is that we're to explore Christian leadership within the church. It's a descriptive passage, but it gives a framework for leadership. Now, I don't preach on leadership very often because I think the approach to leadership is often counter to what we try to aspire to in church. However, when we get into a passage like this, it's easy to just kind of brush it off and say, well, we're just not going to address the issue, but it's right here in front of us. And so this morning, I want to break down this passage that we read into three parts and try to look at defending the statement that there is such a thing as good Christian leaders, there is not such a thing as perfect Christian leaders. And here's the three parts we're going to break it down into. Part number one, not all growth is a blessing, but not all growth is bad, and it can be really hard to determine which is which. Part number two, the Christological qualifications of a leader versus our qualifications or our desired qualifications of a leader. And then part three is the character of a Christological leader. How do we identify this? So let's start with part one. Not all growth is blessing, but not all growth is bad, and it's hard to tell the difference between the two. If we say that all church growth is good, it doesn't take us very long to look around and find stadiums filled with apathetic Christians being taught false teaching Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. It doesn't take long to find large churches that are not preaching true gospel. It doesn't take long to look around and find people that are there for the purposes of entertainment as opposed for the purposes of transformation. It doesn't take long. So if we say that all growth must be from God, we can quickly dismantle that. But if we say that all growth is bad, which seems to be like the pendulum swing where we go, well, it must all be small then, and we have to stay small, then we forget our commission, which is what? Therefore go and make. The word make there implies something. It implies growth. That we're not just to stay within the same size that we are, but our desire is that we would go and that we would communicate clearly the gospel of Jesus Christ so that they might encounter Jesus Christ in a transformative way, therefore we grow. So we can't say that all church growth is good, and we can't say that all church growth is bad. How can we know which is which? Well, it's not simple, but it is possible. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 9 through 12. At that time I said to you, this is Moses speaking to Israel again, you are too heavy a burden for me to carry alone. The Lord your God has increased your numbers, so that today you are as numerous as the stars in the sky. May the Lord, the God of your ancestors, increase you 1,000 times and bless you as he has promised. But how can I bear your problems and your burdens and your disputes all by myself? So before we look at growth, we need to understand that this is a very significant claim that Moses is making. What Moses is saying to Israel is that covenant is being fulfilled in you, in this place, at this time currently happening. That's a big claim. And it's embedded in a covenant that started in creation. Genesis chapter 1, verses 27 and 28. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So the first covenant that we see is this covenant between God and man. And the covenant is that they would go and be fruitful and multiply. And following that, we see the fall, which threatens the covenant. We see the flood, which reaffirms the covenant. We get the Tower of Babel, which is the scattering that leads us all to a single family. Abraham's covenant doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of creation. But it comes into Abraham so that it might go out to the world. Genesis 15, 1-5, this is God's covenant with Abraham. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram, I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant of my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. What we're reading in Deuteronomy chapter 1 is at least in part the fulfillment of this covenant. And it's a very big claim that Moses is making. And so when Moses speaks to Israel about their growth, he's directing them to the covenant. And that gives us our first tool in evaluating growth. Because it is important that we evaluate growth. And it's this: are we seeing attendance go up, building projects initiated, Sunday services that will knock your socks off, a balanced budget, the church being known by other churches? These are not bad in and of themselves, but they are not the markers of a healthy church. They are not the markers of healthy growth. Any of these could be things that we can look at and celebrate, but it doesn't stop a church from being corrupt. It doesn't stop the growth from being corrupt. So our evaluating tools need to be altered to make sure of one thing, that this is a blessing from God. That it was God that increased the numbers, that it was God that did all these things. And so when we look at our evaluative tools, we need a new list. And so this is just a partial list that I thought I'd give to you this morning. There's so many more things that we can use to evaluate church growth. Here it is. Our hearts being transformed. Well, how do we know if hearts are being transformed? You have to listen to people, don't you? Are the scriptures being preached and taught faithfully? Well, how do you know if the scriptures are being taught faithfully? Well, you got to read them yourself. Is reconciliation taking place? Well, how do you know if reconciliation is taking place? If you are reconciling with one another. Are people coming to Jesus? Well, how do you know? Maybe you're leaving them there. Are people healing from their wounds? And are we unified in Jesus? This is an incomplete list. It's just a few things to maybe help us rethink church growth and what it looks like to be a healthy reproducing church, not just a reproducing church. Or a healthy growing church, not just a growing church. And what it comes down to is, can we take zero credit? Or do we take the credit? Can this be orchestrated through our own means? Or do we have no explanation for it, apart from God doing great things? Good growth, even though it's good, still comes with a burden. I think that's significant in this passage. Moses says, like, you have become a burden to me. Now, if we first read that, that's a little offensive, right? If you don't think so, let's try it right now. You have all become a burden to me. It's offensive, all right? And you haven't. Well, In part, but I'll explain that. You see, when we think of burdens, what we think of is something negative because we don't want to be inhibited. We want to be comfortable, we want things to be smooth, we don't want any burdens in our life, and that is not the call of the Christian. We're actually not taught to be without burden. We are taught that the burden can be light through Jesus Christ, but we still carry a burden. What Moses is saying is, I'm burdened. Praise God for this. He is fulfilling the covenant, but the burden is too big for what? Me alone. It's a recognition of a singular leader and the issues that go when we put all of our eggs into that basket. If we put all of our emphasis into a single leader for a variety of reasons, and we'll look at that in a moment too, what happens is that leader is so burdened, they will become overburdened, and they will hurt you. They can't help it because they're being asked to do things that God's not asked them to do. And maybe you might be the one asking them to do that. And so we look at expectations of leadership. What are your expectations of leadership? What do you demand as opposed to desire? What is it you want from church leaders? What we need to understand is that if we have one person that is the person, the burden is a burden that is too heavy. And the way to make that burden lighter is distribution. It's the giving away of leadership. Which leads us to our second point. With the burden of growth comes the need for leadership distribution. But how we build and choose leaders will once again give us insight into whether or not this is a work of God or the desire of self. So we looked at growth. How do we determine what is good growth or godly growth as opposed to what is growth, period? Now we're going to look at our choosing of leaders. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 13 to 14. Choose some wise, understanding, and respected men from each of your tribes, and I will set them over you. You answered me, what you propose to do is good. So I took the leading men of your tribes, wise and respected men, and appointed them to have authority over you, as commanders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, of tens, and as tribal officials. Again, we're dealing with government, but there's some principles and some framework that we can use and apply. I want to present to you a comparison chart, and this is actual research, all right? I went on churchjobs.net and christianjobs. If you don't know these exist, they do. And I went there for research purposes, so don't worry if you're worried, and don't be too excited if you're too excited. Either way, I don't have plans. But I went on there because I wanted to demonstrate something for you that is quite obvious. And I'm going to bring up a chart. If you were to, and you can test this research, if you were to go to churchjobs.net or whatever, christianjobs.com, there's a bunch of them, what you will find in almost every posting is this: strong communicator, an expectation of level of education. We might use the word charismatic in there, we might just imply it. Culturally sensitive or in tune. Hip isn't in there, but it's kind of in there. It's embedded somewhere in there, so you won't find the word hip in there. I hope you don't. If you do, don't go there. 3 to 5 years prior experience, it seems fair. And there's a bonus. And again, you may not find that in there, but you will find this bonus, which is age, gender, ethnicity, something that they're looking for. Now, I want to look at the biblical qualifications that you will find. By the way, none of these, not one, is found in Scripture. And they're found all throughout our job postings for church leaders. The second list is the biblical qualifications. Let's look at it. We have wise, understanding, respected internally, respected externally, above reproach, humble, self-controlled, gentle, not a recent convert, loves what is good, holy, servant, and manages family well. That posting would sit there for years. Because no one wants to sign up and say, oh, I think that's me. Right? And if they do, it might not be the person you want. And sign all those things, because now you evaluate whether you're respected internally, externally, anyways, it gets into the whole thing. But these are biblical qualifications. And there's a lot more, by the way, but what you'll find consistently, and I mean this consistently, is that there is a heavy emphasis on character over competency. But when we look for leaders, we look for competency first and then character. And we've got it entirely flipped around, and now we ask ourselves, why did it turn out this way? And maybe we designed it to turn out this way. Now don't hear me wrong, that first list is not wrong. It's not wrong. It's not wrong to have someone that can be a strong communicator. It's not wrong for a level of education. I'm somebody that believes in formal education. I think those are good things. Charismatic, maybe. It's not wrong to be charismatic. You just might not be it, and it's not one of the prerequisites for leadership. Yet, what are we looking for with that? We are, and first, I think as soon as you say the word hip Christian, you cease to be a hip Christian, but it's one of those things. That's what we look for. We want somebody that is desirable in some way. Now, we cannot have incompetent leaders. We can't. We need people that are going to be able to do the job, and I think that's implied within Deuteronomy chapter 1. But what they were looking for first was character. They were looking for character. And notice too, some for thousands, some for the hundreds, some for 50, some for 10, some is just tribal leaders. That's because we're gifted differently too. And we should shift our expectations based on who is doing what. I really think that's true. There are churches that will never get beyond 20 people. And God bless those churches if they are being faithful. And we shouldn't say that that's wrong for them. We should say God bless them in their ministry. And maybe that's the capacity of the leader. Not in a bad way. Because they're a person of character. They're wise. They're understanding. They're respected internally and externally. They do all these things. So God bless them if it's God ordained. But the emphasis is clear. It's Christ-likeness that we look for when we determine the credibility of a leader. Let me just say this. It is always, always, always character over charisma. It is always humility over strength. It is always love over drive. It is all these things consistently. Moses knew that the task of managing the people was more than he could handle. And so he needed more people. There needed to be a distribution of leadership. And the first thing he looks for is these qualifications, these characteristics of a leader. And he commissioned them to lead with truth and with justice. I really believe that we're at a stage of our church where we talk a lot about discipleship. And there's this whole notion of leadership development. I'm not against leadership development. I think it's good in and of itself, but I think it supplements what we're trying to do with people. It's not the be-all and end-all of leadership. And there is more books on leadership that you could, you just will never finish. You'll never exhaust the topic of leadership. But what if we shifted earlier on in even how we train up our children? That we teach character in Christ, to act like Jesus, and don't worry about the position. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about whether you're going to be a leader or not. I think we've overinflated how important leaders are in that sense. Now, I also think we've reduced recently the significance of leadership. I do, Christian leadership, but I think that we've maybe gone a little too heavy into what it is that we want to develop into, which is always a leader. What does Christ call us to be? Actually, it's going to be hard for you to find the word leader or leadership in the Bible. It's not hard to find the word servant all throughout it. And this leads us to our third part. So what is the characteristic of a Christological leader? If that's indeed what we're going to be looking for. How do we know when this is a Christological leader? Deuteronomy 1:16-17. And I charge your judges at that time, hear the disputes between your people and judge fairly, whether the case is between two Israelites or between an Israelite and a foreigner residing among you. Do not show partiality in judging. Hear both small and great alike. Do not be afraid of anyone, for judgment belongs to God. Bring me any case too hard for you, and I will hear it. Again, we're looking at the judicial system of Israel, but there's a framework here that we can take and apply into our understanding of Christian leadership. A judge in Israel was first chosen for their character. They were to be wise, understanding, and respected. And next, their role was to judge disputes but not to show partiality between even an Israelite and a non-Israelite, a foreigner. Now, it probably just passes by quickly when you read it. I don't know if you understand how radical this text is in the ancient world. That there's no partiality between who is an Israelite and who is not. That's extreme in this world. We read it and go, well, that makes sense. That's how we kind of frame our thinking. That's what we should be. But in this culture, with the surrounding nations, it was always your own people first. They had status. There was to be no partiality. It also meant that there was no class system. There was never meant to be a class system. Whether rich or poor, you were to be judged fairly. And the reason why they were to be judged fairly is because you weren't actually the judge anyways. I love that. Let's appoint judges. They're going to judge. They're not the judges anyways. And the reason why that's being said by Moses is so that we can understand that there's this almost fearlessness that we can have. Do not be afraid of anybody. That's a bold statement. You see, they were chosen because of their character, but they were identifiable because of their justice. They were chosen because of their character, but they were identifiable by their commitment to justice. It's easy, no matter who you are, to be impressed by people. It's really easy to be impressed by people. It's easy, no matter who you are, to be swayed by popular opinion. You want to be liked. You might say you don't want to be liked, but that's something you're just saying so that people will like you. We want to be liked. I don't think anybody, if you really don't want to be liked, you're probably not here. It's really easy, no matter who you are, to give preferential treatment. It actually happens. When you walk in a room, you're assessing the room. You don't stop and think about, oh, I'm assessing the room, but you're assessing the room. And you're thinking about who you want to be beside. And now it takes an intentionality to think about, who am I supposed to be beside? It's very easy, no matter who you are, to be impressed. And in each of these cases, it's essential to intentionally undo that hardwiring. To intentionally think about, where does God want me to be? To intentionally think, what does justice look like in my context today? In the book of John chapter 8, Jesus is confronted by the Pharisees, and they're trying to trap him in a legal dispute, a legal ruling. And what they want to know is, will Jesus uphold the law, or will Jesus set someone free and reject the law? And what it was meant to do was to trap him, because if he upholds the law of Moses, well, he's stuck. Now he's not going to be the gracious Jesus that he's been talking about. And if he doesn't uphold the law, well, then he's going to reject the law, and we got a problem there too. Now they can call him a heretic, they can move forward. And this is what happens. Jesus rules in wisdom, understanding, impartiality, and fearlessness. John 8:2-11 says, at dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, Teacher, this woman who was caught in the act of adultery, in the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say? That was the trap. They were using this as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But when Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger, when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. Go now and leave your life of sin. It was with wisdom, understanding, and grace that Jesus took the law of Moses and claimed it is fulfilled. This is a beautiful picture, because what they were doing was presenting something that they could have followed through on. And Jesus says that law was not perfect. And we have to get our heads around that when we look at Old Testament law, that it was pointing to Jesus, but it wasn't perfection until perfection came and fulfilled it. And now what Jesus is saying is, in the presence of your accusers, who do you think Jesus, if he was anybody other than Jesus, might want to have impressed most? It would have been that group. If you're thinking about advancement, that was the group to get in it. And Jesus had all of the skills, didn't he? He was charismatic. Sure, he's charismatic. People came from all over to find him. He could communicate, he could preach. Look at the Sermon on the Mount. And he could do all those things. He had enough in him that if he had decided that he wanted to go up in the ranks with the Pharisees, he probably could have taken over that thing. Instead, Jesus says, I don't care about what you think. I'm not afraid of you. You're not my judge. When we look at the qualifications of what Jesus reflects for us, he shows us what it means to not be afraid of mobs with rocks. He shows us what it means to choose justice and grace over opinion and desire. And he stands up to them. But he also does something, because sometimes this passage can be misused, which is almost like a pass for everything. Like, well, you can just do everything and grace covers it all. What does Jesus say? He says to the woman, now you go and stop your life the way that you're living. He actually holds her accountable in grace and love. Now, she would not have been able to do that had Jesus gone with the law. And he says, I have fulfilled the law. Also, I find so interesting about this is there was one there that was able to throw a stone. And who was it? It was Jesus. If he wanted, he could have picked up a rock based on his criteria. What's he say? He says that anyone who's sinless can throw the first stone. He could have done that. And instead, he demonstrates that the sinless one is offering grace and mercy. And he calls her to be transformed. A Christological leader will be identifiable because of their enacting out or their living out of justice and grace and the tension that goes with those. They could be identified by refusing to follow the populace for their own gain. They could be identified because they are not the ones throwing stones. It doesn't mean that they're not holding people accountable, but it means that they're not the ones throwing stones. They will fear God alone and defend the cause of the marginalized and the sinner. They will look a lot like Jesus. Now we have one last problem, and we'll wrap up with this last problem. No matter how Christological or qualified a leader is, we all have a little bit of scorpion in us. We need to recognize the old nature still exists within us, and so it's not that they are entirely Jesus, it's that they're Christ-like. And what that means for you as a congregation, and this is really more for you right now than me, I'm the one that you can evaluate. It's just the way it is, isn't it? Better to name it, to identify it, it's just the way that it is. Here's an opportunity for you. One, start to think about the qualifications that you're looking for. Start to think about the men and women who you are comfortable following. Because it's okay if you follow. It's okay to follow. We are all following. We are all servants. We are all slaves. These are okay things. So think about the qualities. Are they Christological or are they the desires of our own heart? If they're the desires of our own heart, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised when it plays out the way that you think it might. And the second part of it is, what do you do when leaders fail? What do you do? And I would say this, be careful if you look down and find a rock in your hand. Because the way that those leaders come to Jesus is the same way that that woman came to Jesus. And it's through a recognition of their own sin and a need for the grace that Jesus alone can offer them. And I know that you have been hurt, many of you, by people who have failed you in Christian leadership. And I am sorry about that. I anticipate that I have the ability to also hurt you, and many around you do. And I feel bad about that. It's sad because it's incomplete, it's imperfect. But if you look down and you find a rock, I would say be careful of your own heart. That those men and women who have failed you in leadership need Jesus. And if you can change your prayers to be prayers that are praying for them instead of stones that are being thrown at them, regardless of the heinous crimes or the hurt that have come with it, what you're going to end up looking like is Jesus.
Thanks for listening to the Capstone Community Bible Church podcast. You can also check out our Sunday service live stream on YouTube at Capstone Ministries or online at capstonetoronto.com.